Hello, I'm Piers Ridyard, CEO of RDX Works, core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. Today, we are having a fireside chat with Jeremy. Jeremy is our Chief Marketing Officer of RDX Works. He is working on many things in the ecosystem, within our company, beyond its borders. And we thought we would have a little chat today about one of the things that Jeremy has been thinking about a while now, which is the importance of AWS as a corollary, as a reference case study on what we can learn from that and what's happening in the DeFi space today. So why don't you kick us off with your thoughts there, Jeremy?
Yeah, so, I'm an old man. I have more gray than you've got. I don't have the beautiful red that you've got. So I've seen a couple of these, transitions of emerging technologies, and I'm also a student of history back in my university days. And if you go back and you look at the history of emerging technologies, there's this sort of pattern that emerges over time. And on the one hand, everyone knows like the Gartner hype cycle, or maybe
Right.
you're familiar with like the Carlotta Perez kind of cycle of like explosion and then crash, trough of disillusionment, and then
Right.
installation. And that happens. But I was starting to think like, what are the things that catalyze the growth of the industry after the crash, right?
Right.
And so you go back to the internet, like if you remember the late 90s, like building a website was really, really expensive and time consuming. You had to set up your own servers, you had to set up your own
Right.
storage. Like it was
Right.
really time consuming. Well, around
And that was
2003,
also true for email as well, right? It was also
email,
true for, like, if
like
you wanted to do anything, you're basically configuring everything. It's like if you
everything,
didn't know
right?
what an FTP server was, then good luck.
Right. And even go further back, like in the beginning of like electricity, like factories would build their own power. I mean, even if you go all the way back to like water wheels and horses
Right.
walking around, sure. But even like electricity generation, they built their own power supply because the
Right.
grid, the infrastructure wasn't there.
Right.
So I was like, okay, wait a second. And what catalyzed it? So if you go back and you look at the history of the internet or the commercial internet, in 2003, AWS basically invented the cloud, the $300 billion cloud industry, hosting industry that we know today, and like reduced the cost of starting up an internet-based business by orders of magnitude. Then we had this
Right.
sort of next wave of explosion of like pretty much every company that's mainstream today:
Right.
Twitter, Airbnb, Pinterest, Uber. I mean, we could go on. So I
Right.
was like, okay, we know, and back in the 90s, we knew that the internet was inevitable, but there were all
Right.
these like realistic friction and infrastructure points. Fast
Right.
forward to today, we know that DeFi is inevitable because of all the costs and benefits and value that it creates. We know that, but it has the
Right.
exact same barriers. So as I look around the market and we sort of see what DeFi is today, which is basically like a glamorized toy, right? It's
Mm.
fun and what have you. But and most people are just iterating on making the toy a little bit better. But
Right.
what we're doing is we're saying, okay, let's totally rethink what the paradigm for DeFi needs to be, what that infrastructure needs to be. And I was like, wow, what we're trying to do, and what I think we will do when we roll out Babylon, is reduce the risk and cost associated with starting a DeFi based business or an asset oriented based business, if you will, by orders of magnitude in the same way that AWS did. So I don't want
Right.
to like say, oh, it's technologically the same thing. That's not the point. The point is what Radix is doing is basically what AWS did for the internet in terms of reducing the cost, reducing the risk. And I believe that will catalyze an entire new wave of DeFi. So that's basically
Yeah.
the thesis I've been playing around with in my head.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of really interesting analogies to draw from that. Like if you look before AWS, and for those who don't know what AWS, Amazon Web Services is a platform that you can go and basically rent different forms of cloud-based computing. So you can rent storage, you can rent processing, you can CPU, you can rent GPU, you can rent RAM, and together you can configure the kind of servers that your service needs if you're building an internet-based service. And before that, what you used to have to do was buy metal, right? Buy the actual servers. So you would go to Dell, or you would go to IBM, or you go to HP, and you would go and buy physical servers. If you wanted launch an internet company back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and before that, part of your business plan would be going to your venture capital company and going, right, we need to spend $2 million on servers. Before we do anything else, we need to spend $2 million on servers. Capital outlay, that's what needs to happen. And what would be really interesting, what is really interesting, is that the industries have this great way of creating groupthink. So a lot of the time in that period, people would be like, well, of course that's how you do it, because, it's cheaper than renting. Like, why would I rent? That's crazy. I can buy it and then it's basically free after that. So why would I ever rent, right? And then you started to see hypergrowth, and you saw these companies literally failing because their servers were being overwhelmed and they didn't have the cash flow and couldn't finance the ability to buy more servers because they had to pay up front for them. And so you are seeing sort of this hypergrowth phase of the internet actually being stymied by the fact that capital wasn't available to be able to buy the things that they needed to be able to address the user base that they were getting. Because those of you remember, sort of like early web and like web 2, a lot of it was all about funding growth by user acquisition. And there wasn't actually much cash flow coming out of that initially, right? But you'd still go and talk to, the like founder teams, startups would have these entire teams dedicated to running servers. You'd have a operations division which would actually be running the servers, and then you got into like renting space that was managed, and that was a bit better, but you're still buying and managing and spinning up and spinning down, and if something failed then you have to do the failover and all this kind of like infrastructure stuff, which turned out to be very standardizable, right? Like it's turned out to be, with the invention, and it was key, of the virtual machine by VMware, to be able to suddenly go, okay, well now what we don't need to, if you run a server of like a weird type, I don't have to buy and create that server. I can just have lots of servers of the same type, and now you can construct them as a virtual machine server. So suddenly I want, a server with 500 gigabytes of RAM, and most servers come with like 20 gigabytes of RAM at the time. You could do that. Right? And so AWS, Amazon Web Services, was actually built by Amazon as an internal product, where they were like, well, we're growing hugely as a company. And the founder, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, saw that this was going to be a repeatable process that was necessary for his business again and again and again. And he was like, this will be, and there was an internal memo that Jeff Bezos sent out around this concept of everything that is consumed within the organization has to be consumed over API as if an external service was using it, right? And that concept of every single department within the organization, every single tech team would have to have an API interface with every other tech team. That included their operations department for running internet, for running their servers and stuff like this. And then they realized, well, sometimes we have really big demand. Sometimes we don't have very big demand. Maybe we could start selling some of this excess supply to people who don't have the operational capacity that AWS does to be able to build this. That was then when startups, they went out and startups started to go, oh my God, I don't have to buy servers. I can just go to this website and I can spin up a server. And then if I need another server, I can do it instantaneously. If I need another one, I can do it instantaneously. If my business grows, I am only constrained by the need to pay for my monthly server bills rather than needing to have. Right? Yeah, it was Elastic. They called it, I think, Elastic Cloud.
Yeah, they called it EC2, Elastic Cloud. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, right. So EC2, like this storage was like a first starting point. The key is, like, wonderful story, but the key is that insiders in the industry thought a lot of people thought it was a stupid idea. Like it was, or that it was only going to be a niche market for startups that were like only just getting started. And when they could get enough funding, then, of course they'd run their own infrastructure. And like the truth of the matter is now, like Netflix uses it, and like the biggest companies in the world with the biggest storage, everybody uses it, right?
We all use it every day. We don't even think
we
about
all use it every day. Like every single service that you is probably running at least part on AWS that you consume today.
Right.
And so the key thinking here was thinking about what is the infrastructure requirement to make sure that the infrastructure lowers the barrier to entry and increases the speed of innovation in the space in such a way that startups and founders and companies can forget about the stuff that can be sort of normalized and can just focus on the thing that is the key value add. And I think that philosophy goes so deep in Radix as well, so deep in the code that is being created by RDX Works, because it is all about looking at the industry from a perspective of future back. It's like, what do we think the industry is going to require for it to be able to get $400 trillion on top of it? It's really going to need a piece of infrastructure that continually keeps that barrier to entry low, lowers the complexity costs for developers, lowers the sort of the time to market, and means that you don't just have internal specialists. And that's also true of users as well, internal specialists that they're already in the industry, that understand everything and kind of like hack things together. Like, it will never succeed if that is the case. And that is, that's been the case for everything, that creation of infrastructure that can be relied upon rather than requiring a hugely high level of expertise to be able to use.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're done here because you covered it. Like, I appreciate the PhD thesis as well, but like that was, the time to market is huge. And infrastructure is not sexy. That's the part. It's like nobody gets like all hot and heavy about infrastructure, but infrastructure. I mean, we do, right? Exactly.
I love infrastructure. Infrastructure is great.
Nerds like you do for sure. But like the reason why nerds like you get super jacked up about infrastructure is because it's so freaking important. And let's be honest, like if you do it right, it does really well financially. Like, let's be honest,
Right.
That's what people need. Because once they understand, oh my God, there's this, for lack of a better term, and Matt, don't shoot me, plug and play sort of capability, that's like an absolute game changer. And I think when you look at, like, you take a step back and you think about, okay, what are we doing here? Well, we're basically inventing this category of what I call, and I haven't totally popularized this, and I'm dropping this on Piers right now, but it's asset-oriented DeFi. We are the innovators of asset-oriented DeFi, and we're the people, and that will catalyze this new level, because asset-oriented DeFi changes the economics of the industry, changes the risk profile of the industry. It greatly accelerates time to market, which just throws out much more innovation, which means it's going to happen. And then I would say take a step back and look at the larger macro context of like the world right now. The world is trying to figure out, how do we find like meaningful economic growth in this like really crazy sort of high inflation, low unemployment, central banks seem to be teetering on the edge of existence. I'm not even sure we might be seeing the slow death spiral playing out right now. All this stuff happening. And so something's going to step into that void, and people need a place for that innovation. And I don't think it's going to happen in the traditional sector because there are too many crazy parts. And so now, like a developer, a fintech 3.0 or 5.0 or 12.0 or whatever you want to call it, can come in and be like, oh, now I can plug into a decentralized cloud, if you will, but it's a special DeFi platform, and go innovate. And oh, by the way, my TAM is 24/7 global from day one, which is a whole nother thing that we can talk about that all day. Everyone knows that part. So yeah, I think like that's what I want to drive home is like, take a step back and look at what asset-oriented DeFi can do to change the economics of building in Web3, and what that means for the future, and what I think will be hopefully the accelerator back up that curve.
Yeah, I think that there's there's an inflection point. Like, so it's funny that like crypto was created initially as a response to sort of financial crisis, right? And sort of the Bitcoin 2008.
Right.
And I think that the thing that has started as a toy, right? That, like, I mean, I don't think Bitcoin's a toy. For the record, I think that Bitcoin is doing what it's supposed to do. It has its internal battles, but I don't think Bitcoin is a toy. But I do think that the things like Ethereum, while they're great proof of concepts, I don't think anyone looks at Ethereum seriously and goes, yeah, well, we could definitely build something that could replace global financial systems on top of this. And I don't think anyone's there, right? Like, I think that the Radix's starting point has been one where we have had the benefit of going and looking at everyone and going, oh my God, like, we now know what product market fit is. And now we understand what the roadmap to creating the technology that is necessary to be able to decentralize a $400 trillion global financial system is. But you have to start with the simple, obvious stuff. You got to start with how you build smart contracts and then how you deploy them. And then all of the other stuff will be built on top of it, like the user experiences and the ways in which, you know, the next Googles and Facebooks and Twitter of Web3 are going to come along and build on platforms like Radix. But like the starting point for AWS was also very simple. You look at AWS now, and the number of services that are available for the number of industries that it covers is absolutely mind-blowing. But they started off with one product. They started off with storage, because they realized that storage was one of the things that was the biggest bottlenecks to expanding, you know, Web 2 companies, when you were like, you know, suddenly getting uploads of pictures all of the time, and then you needed to be able to have high bandwidth storage. So they started with a model of repeatability of standard components that will make it easy for innovators to move quickly for the next set of users that they're addressing. And that's exactly what Radix is doing, is creating this infrastructure that provides the best next step, but also a complete plan, structure, framework around that as to how that can be expanded to give all of the scale that's necessary, to give all of the functionality that's necessary, but being practical in how it's approached. Because I think that this is what crypto forgets a lot of the time, is at the end of the day, what crypto has to do is the same thing that every other Web 2 company has to do, which is deliver value to its users. And I think that we forget that a lot of the time, is that it's too easy to look at the frothiness of the market and get excited or distracted, when actually the key here, and you know, it's right, a lot of people don't find infrastructure sexy, because good infrastructure is boring, but the sexy part of that is invisible. But the sexy part of that is all of the engineering and like meticulous approach to how you build the right kind of infrastructure at scale. I find that amazing. Like so
that's why we love you, man. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things I think that are really important to what you said is, like, you know, one thing I saw a picture of the founder of Waze on wherever it was this morning, but he was wearing a shirt that said "Fall in love with the problem, not the solution."
Yeah.
And I was like, boom, that's exactly what Radix did. You know, and I think one of our blessings and curses, if you will, around the Radix revelation is that in order to appreciate what Radix has done and the architecture, is like, you need to be able to take a step back from there's this solution, it's all EVM, what have you, and take a step back and know, what's the problem? Well, the problem is, how the hell do we get $400 trillion on a decentralized ledger? Okay, that once you understand that that's the problem, then if you fall in love with that, you start really ripping it and you start looking at it, you're like, why the hell would I go to a layer 2 solution, you know, that breaks atomic composability? Why would I shard an entire network that, you know, breaks composability and, you know, all that kind of stuff? You're just like, you know, and I think that understanding is one of the opportunities we have, but it's obviously one of the challenges we have. So I think that's one of the things that made me fall in love with Radix. It's just like, yes, we're thinking so big about the problem. The only other thing I'd say is, you know who the other key player in that Amazon Web Services was Andy Jassy, the current CEO. He was like the guy who basically identified, early on, he's like, because his engineers were like, hey, it's taken us 2 to 3 months to build stuff, right? And I know you love telling like the Hayden Adams story about Uniswap. I mean, it took the
Right.
guy a year to build Uniswap,
Right.
right?
Right.
Well, it's not acceptable to take a year in a fast moving digital environment. And so how can you crunch that down? And so when he realized that it's taken 3 months, he's like, well, if it's taken us 3 months and we have some of the best engineers on the planet, then it's probably taken other people at least 3 months. And I think if you look at Hayden Adams, you're like, all right, here's a guy who basically built Uniswap. Pretty good, figured it out. But it took him a year just to get the
Right.
V0 out. So
Yeah.
we need to shorten that. And that's where I think like all this is like, we fell in love with that problem of how do we create a full on developer experience that basically gives developers everything they need to go out and basically upgrade our global financial
Right.
system by orders of magnitude.
Right. Right. And I think that that
Coffee really kicked in on that one, man. Sorry.
that approach is key. Is like everything that I mean, I've talked about this. I talk about this a lot internally. I don't know how often I've said it externally, but like I always think of RDX Works' job as keeping is as the identifying the places that we can do hard work that means that other people don't have to, like where that hard work is repeatable, right? So like, infrastructure is a great point of that. Like lots of what the hard work that's happening in Ethereum today is sticking plasters over bad infrastructure in the first place, right? A lot of hard work that's happening at the programming level, again, is a sticking plaster over bad decisions. And like, like these are smart people who started off and built something, which is absolutely, to be praised. And Ethereum is where I got started, right? So I'm not dissing Ethereum. I'm just saying that where it's ended up has meant that there's a lot of hard work that is put on top of the developers. You go up to the user level, right? This idea of your public-private key pair being your assets, and if you lose your private key, that's it. Like that a basis for a wallet as the account basis on top of a public ledger, again, really does create this problem of like more hard work at the user level or the application level, right? And so and then you can also look at things like Instapass, or again, is going, look, regulation is coming, like it or not.
Totally.
Regulation is coming to DeFi, and there will always be a choice for people to go either way. But like, if you want to be able to build a regulatory compliant DeFi application, you're going to need some tools, or you're going to have to build your own internal regulatory compliance department. And that's a big job. That's really hard. And that takes lots and lots of money. So like, how do we continue to identify areas where we can do the hard work that maintains the barrier to entry is low and means that people can continually focus?
I love that. Doing the hard work so you don't have to. I totally love it. One of the things about it's funny. I was just talking to someone who works at a KYC provider, like a Jumio kind of thing, like that. I don't remember the name of her firm, but she was asking me about regulation, and like you said, it's coming, and I feel like there's the overused Wayne Gretzky quote of "skate to where the puck is going." Right. Shout out to all the Canadians who are out watching. But basically, it's like that's one of the things I love about it. It's like no one really cares that we're going to make regulatory DeFi like much, much easier today. Nobody cares today.
Right.
But that day is coming. And when that day comes and we're sitting there and we have the whole infrastructure, like no guarantees, but I definitely like where we're going to be sitting. And if we can play our cards right, I think that's just phenomenal. And that's where I think like really falling in love with that problem. Because if you think about like, that image we love to throw around of the propeller planes versus the jet plane, like, yeah, sure, there's a little bit of marketing fluff there, my bad. But, like all of these, I at least you have to acknowledge when you're laying on the marketing BS. Like it's like just accurate, right? It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, there's a little bit of spin there, but like the idea is like these other layer ones, like they sort of fell into DeFi almost accidentally, right? It's like they didn't know, and I think Vitalik is going to be up there with like the great inventors of all time, like the Edisons, the Gutenbergs, for sure. Satoshi, like great ones, but like that doesn't mean what he built is going to be the thing. Tesla basically was the guy who got electricity, but we don't use DC current, right? We use the AC current.
Right.
So like
Right.
that kind of thing is like really valuable for people to understand.
It was Tesla. Just let me correct you on that. It was Tesla who invented AC current.
Okay, so I got it backwards. Whatever. Yeah.
It was Tesla. Tesla invented AC current, and it was Edison, who was all about the DC current and was like trying to make everyone do DC. And Tesla was like, no, this is way more efficient.
I got it flipped. Sorry.
I broke your.
That's fine. I didn't rip you when I told you that when you said it was Bezos who started AWS when it was actually Jassy. But that's okay, man. It's all right. I didn't realize we were getting into a historical fact right here, but that's okay. That's how we're doing it. You want to throw it down? Fine.
I mean, like I feel like we're gonna get pulled up on it anyway, so it might as well be real time.
Like, actually, this is. Don't you know that it was like Marconi who invented the radio? We're like, oh, okay, sure, yeah.
I think that like that whole approach of like skate to where the puck is heading is really important too, and it's a big part of what we spend most of our time on strategy thinking about. Is like the way that you win is being in the right position in the market when the market changes. But the way that you make sure that you are is 12 to 24 months of planning prior to that,
right,
to make sure that you are in the position to win. And I think that like so much of what Radix does is around these long concepts of what is the right tool to be building for the problems that are going to emerge tomorrow, not just today.
And it's hard and it's lonely because like a lot of people, like even people who have been in the industry, you and I have been on calls with people who have been in the industry a long time who like can't see that the other model is inherently flawed and just isn't going to make it. The scale, no matter how awesome, it's not enough. They're breaking the atomic composability. And I think like that's frustrating. And I think the other thing that like part of the reason why we're having this conversation is like, this is not official Radix or RDX works or Radix messaging or anything like that. What we're trying to do is say, look, we know if there's another lesson of history is that the best technology doesn't always win, VHS and Betamax is like your classic example. So we know we have the best tech, but that doesn't mean anything. What we need to figure out how to do, and this is why I have no hair, is like, how do we explain this in a compelling way? And so helping people who fundamentally understand that like, wow, when you change the economics and you build really great infrastructure and you accelerate time to market, that's a competitive advantage. The only way we can do this is because we have the only full asset oriented DeFi stack on the planet. Right? But nobody cares about how fast our TPS is and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't matter. It's what does it do? It accelerates time to market. It lowers the cost. It lowers the risk. That's why our retweets were so popular. Those are the things that entrepreneurs, investors, innovators care about. And now, as we get closer and closer to Babylon, we can more confidently, and even BetaNet, we can more confidently talk about, like, look, don't take it from us. Go bang around on it for yourself.
Right. I think we'll leave it there. But
we're done.
Super interesting idea, and I hope that resonates for some of you. And please do.
Yeah, look forward to hearing what people have to say about it.
Yeah, give us feedback. So thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you, Piers. Always a pleasure.